good afternoon for some of you. Thank you so much for joining me in this space. We will just wait for 2 minutes while we wait for the speakers and more people to come in. Thank you so much for joining. I promise you a good conversation. Hi, Prabir. Just as a backup, I'll be making a co-host. Um, Nothing specific. It's just to be on the safe side in case Twitter sometimes acts funny. So just sharing that with you. If possible, just accept it, and that's about it. Hi, Kennedy. Welcome to the space. Kennedy, I just shared a co-host invite with you. Thanks, Prabir, for accepting. Awesome. Hi, Kennedy. Welcome to the space.
Hi, Pranav. Nice to be here.
Likewise, thank you so much for joining. We will just wait for a couple of minutes more. I was just in another call with Ben, and he'll be joining in soon. Hi, Nate. I will just make you a speaker. Just sent you the invite, buddy. Awesome. Thanks for joining in, Nate. And we have Ben in the house. Ben, I've sent you an invite. Thank you so much. Awesome. Great, guys. We are pretty much set. Thank you so much, Ben, for coming in, and Nate and Kennedy. I am just expecting one more speaker, and we will just wait for a minute more. Thank you so much for your patience, guys. I can see for already out here, we have people from Africa, from Canada, from Europe. Love that. We have a very popular upcoming NFT collection here, uh, and these are my favorite kind of people. These are teenagers. So glad to have you on the space. Love that. We also have the fighters here. So great to have you. Hi Hazel, thank you so much for joining in. Awesome to have you. Great guys. Uh, with due respect to all the people who've come in on time, I would just like to take this opportunity to kick off the space while we wait for my last speaker to join. Firstly, just let me extend my gratitude to each one of you for being over here and giving me your 1 hour. I hope to make it worth your while. Nate, if you can just mute yourself for the moment. There's some background noise at your end, and I can then invite you later. Uh, Thank you so much. Hi, Rice. Good to have you here. I am just inviting you to speak also. Great. I have all my speakers in house. Awesome. Rice, I've just shared a link with you to speak. Okay. Good. Great. So, the topic for today is actually one which is very closely related to the work that has been going on with Gitcoin. And I am super excited to have, in fact, my favorite person from the Gitcoin community, simply for the fact that he is so accessible and so open to conversations. It's one thing to be an OG, but it's one thing to be an OG who's accessible. You can speak to, you can relate to. So thank you so much, Ben, for being here. And before I, go into raptures, and I can go on for a long time on this particular part, I do want to highlight the topic for today, which is around impact hyperstructures. And this is a concept which actually this word or the concept came across, as I see it on the internet, around about January, put up by Joseph. And since then, I believe it's been worked upon by some of the smartest brains in the space in order to just put this together and what it means. And I'm very excited to bring this to you. But it also relates to something, to a lot of things, in fact, which are happening at Gitcoin Grant. And, the best ways to really understand a concept are to see the use case. And hence, what we're going to do is we're going to start off with the use case, and then we're also going to talk about the thesis, the hypothesis behind the use case. So, but before we get into that, I am going to have a quick round of introductions with each of the speakers. That'll be like about 2 minutes each, and I would love for them to just share where they're from, what they're doing, what how, and just a little bit about their expertise, their interests. I would love all of that. And I'm going to start off with myself. Once again, thank you guys for joining the space. My name is Pranav Khanna. I am calling to you from Mumbai, India. Uh, it's not like a backwater of the world, but it's definitely still a developing country. We have a host of issues, but we are also a functioning democracy, and I love it for that. Uh, Climate change is something which is going to hit us hard, really hard, because we are one of the largest populations on Earth. We have a lot of things going in right now for us, a lot of good things happening here. Climate change could actually be just something that derails all of that. So it's something that we are really concerned about. I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to invite Ben West, to please just introduce himself for a quick 2 minutes. Ben.
Hello, everybody. Pranav, just for the sake of saying it, you're one of my favorite people in Web3.
Thank you.
And I'm really honored to be here with all of you today. I'm coming to you from Toronto, which, the way that I like to recognize where I am is to talk about the indigenous history of the place. This is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Wendat, Mississaugas of the Credit, and a variety of other indigenous folks. Very excited about the upcoming grants round, and just having so many amazing individuals from all over the world, bringing their projects forward. So yeah, just great to be here with all of you today.
Thanks so much for that, Ben. Nate, can I invite you to just give a quick 2-minute introduction?
Yeah, thanks for bringing me on, Pranav. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here today. My name's Nate. I write on Eat Sleep Crypto, mostly about tokenomics and hyperstructures. I'm based in San Diego, California, and my interest in this is mostly to see sustainable solutions created to solve large problems that don't involve relying on traditional infrastructure and traditional means of social organization. So rather than trying to depend on government to do things that we've been asking for them to do for a long time, we're taking the initiative ourselves and building using blockchains and decentralized applications to solve our problems.
Love that. Thank you so much for that, Nate. And that really sets the tone, for all the work that we do in climate and crypto. Is not really waiting for who it's ever it may be, but to actually take work in our hand and just get down to it and do it. Thank you so much for that. Rice, can I invite you to please unmute yourself?
Hello. Can you hear me, Pranav?
I can, Rice. Yep, loud and clear.
Yep, and it's Reese, by the way, like Reese's peanut butter cups. But it's all good. Most people.
My bad.
Most people. You're good. Most people mess it up. Hello everybody. My name is Reese. I was a co-founder of East Denver. Taught some blockchain ethics at the MIT Media Lab, and then now lead an org called Root, which is kind of a startup studio. And one of the things we're working on is a Web3 and Society Center. And so just love a lot of what the Web3 and Society Center thinks about is, in 2050 or 2100, when we look back on Web3, can we look back on it in a positive way, unlike how we look back on Web2? And so what that means is a lot of kind of shaping the ecosystem to be more collaborative and kind of focus on public goods, which is a lot of what the folks here are doing. So excited to be on the call today.
Thank you so much for that, Reese. And lastly, we have Kennedy here. Kennedy is, somebody who's really connecting up a lot of people in the global south. And thank you so much for being here. Again, Kennedy is here specially because he's doing all the work that is to be done in a use case. Kennedy, thanks for being here. Please unmute yourself and introduce your work, please.
Thank you, Pranav. My name is Kennedy Nganga. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. Happy to be here with all of you. I'm leading the team at Shamba Network that is building a digital MRV system, and a decentralized system for providing ecological data to ReFi applications and to other ReFi projects that basically need information from the real world. So we are leading the building of the infrastructure that people who are building on ReFi can be able to use to be able to create the kind of credits that they are working on. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Kennedy. So just to put this in perspective and context, I'm going to run the space in a particular format. I have a series of questions for the speakers, and that's going to take about like 30 minutes. And then I would love to have, the last 20, 25 minutes open for the audience to really have questions for the speakers. And just, if you have thoughts about hyperstructures, about Gitcoin, I would love for you to raise your hand. And that at any moment in the Twitter space, please feel free to raise your hand. And I would love to invite you on stage and give you the stage. Just a request there, please keep it brief. We want to have everybody's voices heard out here. So if you get into a monologue, I'll cut you off, and no offense meant there. Thank you so much for your cooperation. I'm going to start off the conversation here with Ben. And, it's all about the commons, frankly. Climate is all about the commons. And I would love for him to share his journey, right, in terms of Gitcoin and towards building common public goods and public commons. And also, I would love for him. It's a tall ask, but and I don't know how much we can share. But there's lots of stuff, lots of good stuff happening on the Gitcoin platform in this coming year. So if you can touch upon that briefly, and just this movement about all of these changes leading Gitcoin from being a socialware to a trustware, right? So where you have your proof of being to actually the trust being part of the system itself, a hyperstructure, right? As Owoki has just recently put out on his tweet. So Ben, your thoughts, please, in no particular order.
Sure, and thank you for that sort of juicy question, Pranav. My own personal journey into Gitcoin, I'll try to be brief. My background is in environmental campaign work. I both in nonprofit organizations as well as working for an indigenous community, and also being involved in political campaigns. Basically, I've tried to do everything you could think of to be helpful to the climate and to our ecosystems for much of my professional career. And in a roundabout sort of way, that led me to Web3 and to Gitcoin most recently. My first introduction to crypto was actually quite early on. Something like 2013, 2014. A friend who was mining Bitcoin, introduced me to it. Without going too deep into that story, it was an activist and a kind of a counterculture person who gave me my first introduction to the crypto space, and I think that really shaped my perception of the space and sort of the potential for this technology to be a force for change for good in the world. And I've been interested in Gitcoin since early days. I was a fan of open source technology and a user of Linux and free open source software. And I think a lot of what we think of in terms of hyperstructures really has its roots in the open source movement, like this idea of composability and interoperability. Is sort of fundamentally tied to the sort of open source nature of the technology that we're using. And to me, that has always been a very interesting, thing to experiment with. Really curious to dive deeper into some of Nate's thoughts on this as well, because I do think that these kinds of structures can really be a replacement or an additive to sort of existing state structures. And for me, that was really the big frustration, was just seeing the lack of action, the lack of funding, and sort of saw this opportunity for these new microeconomies to develop to support the kinds of solutions we need to see in the world. And that's really the roots of Gitcoin, is finding ways to fund open source web development projects that supported public goods. And I think as the Gitcoin project has sort of evolved over time, there's been this understanding and awareness that's grown that that this idea kind of transcends just open source software or even really just Web3 development. The Gitcoin platform and the quadratic funding mechanism have been used to fund support for small businesses in Boulder, Colorado during the lockdowns because of COVID, for example. And from there it sort of expanded out to this idea of cause rounds, which I'm now lucky enough to be the coordinator of. So we have a round for climate solutions and for diversity, equity, inclusion, and this round we're going to have a decentralized science round. And I think probably the most exciting thing that's happening with sort of the ongoing evolution of Gitcoin is this idea of becoming more of a protocol. The forkability of the Grants 2.0 platform, as it's being called, which is basically just an upgrade to our existing infrastructure and a whole new sort of framework for the Gitcoin grants that's more easily forkable, copyable, and potentially interoperable between any number of different folks who are building infrastructure on top of what Gitcoin's stack looks like right now. And I'm very excited about what that's going to look like as that continues to evolve. We have some of our first testing of that new structure happening already. And in the next round, you're going to see more and more of the tools like Gitcoin Passport that continues to evolve and sort of becomes more central to this process, becoming available to folks who want to sort of use those tools and build upon them. And maybe just as one last thing I'll say, because I don't want to eat up too much time here, one thing in particular that I find really interesting about hyperstructures is how they can be sort of a self-regulating, self-governing system, sort of like a bacterial structure, or a network of cells. And these systems, need to have feedback loops. They need to have, kind of the ongoing participation of all the different members within the network. And, I think that's the right way to see Gitcoin as, not just a software stack, but sort of a social stack and a community sort of hub, I guess, with a lot of different sort of pieces to that broader extended network. And it's really the feedback loops and the sort of the ongoing interaction between everybody involved that makes it what it is. The projects that come together and form new connections and sort of build upon each other, learn from the where the blockages people are having, and sort of the ongoing accountability that we all have in sort of a transparent, blockchain enabled space where, people are posting their updates and, we're seeing sort of the progress and progression and often really have a stake in the outcomes. So anyway, that's me kind of sort of sharing, some of my thoughts about hyperstructures and how that relates to Gitcoin. But, I do think there's a lot of really exciting stuff coming in the near future. And if anybody's got more specific questions about the upcoming grants round, or anything related to that, I'm also happy to dive into that a bit later.
Totally. I'm sure, Ben, there are people who have those questions, and I'm going to keep them for the end of this conversation, meaning in about 15 minutes, before we open up for audience, because I do want to connect all of that you've said, the forkability, the composability, this possibility to really be self-regulating, just like bacterial structures, mimic nature to that point, right? But in fact, go a step beyond in terms of, making sure that, these structures run on perpetually. And this is where I just want to bring in Nate to talk about hyperstructures, to just, start with that conversation, and in no particular order again, right? Nate, key features, what do you think that, any use cases that you're seeing already come up in place? All yours, Nate. Curious to hear your thoughts.
Thanks, Pranav. Yeah, Ben, I loved a lot of the things you said. So for people in the audience, an overview of hyperstructures here. Basically, hyperstructures, there was an article by Jacob that's in my pinned tweet for context for all of you to read. I highly recommend reading it. Jacob.eth wrote that one. And hyperstructure is basically a persistent protocol that operates forever at the cost of gas. So the defining features of these protocols, they're permissionless, they're user agnostic, so they're not keeping people out of using the system based on who they are. They operate at the cost of gas, so they're basically free, and a handful of other things. But the most important thing to me is that these things are self-perpetuating. They're systems that have incentives for users to participate, and users of different kinds. So there might be a creator on one side, a hyperstructure in the middle distributing their content, and users on another side of the hyperstructure that are consuming this content. And all of that happens with no trusted third party. It's just the blockchain as the intermediary. So hyperstructures to me are really fascinating because they're unstoppable in a few senses of the word. So hyperstructures with public goods, I see evolving into sort of the infrastructure for decentralized communities and decentralized projects to be more effective in the world. I think you can introduce hyperstructures in kind of the same way you can introduce a market to an ecosystem or a community. You place it in the middle, and it facilitates the interaction of those communities. So that's at a high level what I'm really interested in about hyperstructures. And there were a few things that Ben mentioned that I wanted to hit on. So that these blockchain applications and hyperstructures are an outgrowth of open source software. And the thing that's most interesting to me about hyperstructures that I'm most concerned with is comes from that they are outgrowths of open source software, which has been relatively unsuccessful in monetizing. And monetization gets a bad rap because it's I think a lot of people in the climate change activism space are reacting. It seems like a common criticism of climate change activism is that it comes from a hatred of the existing social order or a hatred of capitalism rather than a desire to create something good. And I call this being like anti-Y instead of pro-X, or I invert that. I say you want to be pro-X and not anti-Y. You want to frame yourself as creating some valuable solution to something rather than decrying the problem. And I think now that we have this kind of infrastructure, these hyperstructures, we're able to do that effectively and start to move forward and tackle the problems that we really want to solve in the world. And so part of that, to me, is creating, I guess, these three qualities of hyperstructures that we want to create. One, we want to make them useful, primarily. Then we want to make them valuable so that they're sustainable over time. And then we want to make them secure. And those three go hand in hand. So I actually might say secure is second and valuable is third, because you can create things that are valuable to people that are not necessarily financially valuable. But if you have systems that depend on money coming in, you have to make sure that money is incentivized to come in. So this is a high level of the shift that I'm seeing from activism to agorism, like becoming sort of entrepreneurs in service of the planet. These are a couple of qualities of hyperstructures that I'm interested in weighing in on. Is their utility, their security, and their value accrual. And those three things are not automatic. They're not built into hyperstructures. They have to be engineered in on purpose so that hyperstructure has longevity. So I'll give up the floor, but that's my interest in hyperstructures, and I'm sure there'll be more to say.
Love that, Nate. Thanks so much for framing that. I would love to bring in Reese out here. Reese, feel free to share your thoughts on hyperstructures and specifically, again, around any use cases and around challenges to implementing it. I know it's been a seminal and a short time to this work, but would love your perspectives on it.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you both, Ben and Nate, for discussing this. I think my high-level thing, I'll actually post this on Pranav's underneath a link on his thing. I think that the hyperstructures work is incredibly good. It is the power of crypto technology to use code to socially organize humans, and I think that the bonus pieces that I'd add to it, just to add context for folks, are there's this great piece by Josh Stark from ETH Global, from 0x Stark, about hardness, and he talks about how the world's, it's called atoms, institutions, and blockchains, and the idea from it is in both hyperstructures and hardness and this other one that I'm going to talk about are all in this space of institutional design. And so this one from Josh about hardness is all about how the world existed with these hard things called atoms. And atoms are what created the universe and what created initial stone technology and factories and all that. And so those were kind of like hard things that could exist in the world and perpetuate for a long period of time. And then we got the next hard thing, which were institutions. And these were things like religions, which were able to, or companies or things like that, which were able to like bring people together around these narratives, which, you know, for something like Christianity was able to self-perpetuate for 2,000 plus years because of its ability to aggregate capital, create trust within itself, and become like a quote-unquote hard institution. And then finally, Josh talks about blockchains as the final bit of hardness. And blockchains have this kind of, just like atoms were a shared hard infrastructure before, and institutions with narratives had a good like hard infrastructure after. Now blockchains have this very hard infrastructure layer, which is just code. It's the blockchain itself, and it is this like thing that will self-perpetuate for a long period of time. I mean, obviously, something like Bitcoin, when you think about how long it's going to exist in the world, it could be a very long time, because these things get spun up and then perpetuate as databases on the internet for a long, long time with a decentralized network of miners and users, etc. So that piece is one that I'd recommend folks read. If you go to 0x_Stark, or just type in hardness, or type in atoms, institutions, blockchains, that's another one to add to your set. And then the other one I'd add to your set is this piece from Nadia, I don't know how to say her last name, Nadia Espapaverva, which is nadia.xyz, and it's called Idea Machines. And she looks at something not native necessarily to crypto, but outside of crypto, called effective altruism. And it is this, she talks about these, whether it's Web3 and regen, or whether it's effective altruism, or whether it is something like bentoism or public goods funding. There's these kind of new ideas that spring up in the world. They have a clear ideology, they have a clear funding set and like community around them, and then they start to create outcomes. And that kind of feedback loop brings back in more ideology, more funding, more people, and then before long you have an idea machine that started as nothing that then gets built into this like larger ecosystem of people. And so I would say for folks to add into their set of how they think about institutional design, not only hyperstructures, but also hardness and idea machines.
Love that, Reese. Thank you so much for sharing. You know, in the Hindu religion, we start with saying that first there was nothing, absolute nothing, and then came the sound, Om, and from the sound flowed creation. And I mention that here because, hyperstructures were simply not there. And what we're talking about here, perpetual machines, free to use, no fee, these are mind-bending thoughts and ideas. And what's been shared out here, Ben started with really this conversation and this perspective around how all of these can be in service to the public, to the commons. Nate gave us, these basic features about what are hyperstructures, and then Reese has given us this, this funnel or this thought process, especially around atoms, the hardness, and then, the narrative of institutions, and then again back to the hardness of blockchains, and all that. We can really translate this thought around hyperstructures through code into reality. So that's what I present to the audience out here. I'm sure you have lots of questions, and I'm going to come to that. But I'm going to shift gears here a little bit. I'm going to go back to Ben and have him talk a little bit about the GR15 grant round. I'm sure he has some juicy stuff or some tips for you to really get your things in order. And then I'm going to come to Shamba, to Kennedy, to talk about his experience with Gitcoin and how Gitcoin has really helped him. And I really want to urge people, to have this in mind when you're listening to Kennedy. And if you can just hear this come through, that he came in for the grant, but he found a community with which he's growing, right? So that's what I want you to have that at the back of your mind when you hear him. But first, Ben, please do come in, and if you can share a little bit about what's the dates that's happening out there. The early bird gets the worm especially for the climate rounds. I would love your inputs. Hear it from the man himself is always good.
Thanks, Pranav. So the upcoming grants round is very close. It's running from September 7th to the 22nd. For those of you who are paying attention to the merge, you may notice that the merge is right in the middle of the round, which is an interesting component of what's happening sort of in the broader space. We actually have some partners who are going to be offsetting the first half of the round, sort of symbolically, making the entire round as as close to net zero as possible. And I think it'll be a great opportunity to talk about, really transcending beyond just like reducing our impact, but actually moving to that sort of positive vision of the world that Nate was referencing. Really excited just to see the breadth of the kinds of projects that are coming out in the climate solutions round in particular, although there's so much innovation happening all across all 17 of the ecosystem rounds, all 4 of the cause rounds, and in the main round. We'll probably have around the same amount of funding overall for all the rounds, if not a little bit more in terms of matching funds, and all kinds of great projects coming forward. In part because of the hard work of people like you, Pranav, helping to organize folks all over the world to get involved. Really thrilled to have Shamba on here with us, and Kennedy. I think a really great example of the kind of innovative and exciting projects that are coming forward. Just to say one thing about the early bird special that you were talking about, we are trying to encourage people to get their grant proposals in early. Even if you were a grantee in previous rounds, we ask that you update your grant with information about what's happened since the last grants round. We of course know that it's a relatively short period of time between rounds, but we do just like to know sort of like where things are at on your roadmap and how it's going, and sharing not just your accomplishments, but also any challenges you faced is also useful information for everybody. We also ask that you request the tags that you're applying for again. We have some new internal processes which should make that process smoother than it may have been in previous rounds. Hopefully everybody had a relatively frictionless experience with requesting and getting tagged into the various rounds in the past, but never-ending improvement and iteration is always the name of the game. So if you do want to be live on the platform on the 7th, and it is important to, just in terms of, it's only a 2-week window, and to really make the most of the round, you definitely want to try to be up there for as much of the round as possible. We ask that you get your proposal in by the end of day on the 3rd, which is, the end of the sort of last weekend before the round kicks off that Wednesday. And we're doing that to just make sure that our team has the time to really carefully review proposals before the beginning of the round. The actual final deadline is midnight on the 14th, so I mean it is possible to get a grant proposal in right up until the midway point of the round. But try to get in early if you can, and there are some special POAPs and potentially some other surprises for folks if they get their proposal in early. So we are trying to sort of incentivize that, and there's a couple different ways to sort of help make that happen for you. And it's worth saying that there's a lot of support out there too. Like if you're wondering whether you should do this, or you could use some support or feedback, I want to give a shout out to the All for Climate team, who's been helping since our first climate round in GR12. And there's a number of other groups, and for all the different cause rounds and ecosystem rounds, who are out there to help. Probably the easiest place to start is just going into the support channels in Discord. But there is also a lot of Telegram threads that are out there, or even just posting, about what you're considering on Twitter, and using the GR15 hashtag often will get the attention of others out there. One of the beautiful things about this community is how collaborative it is, and just watching people support each other and sort of helping all of our projects grow has been a really cool thing to see. So yeah, that's really the lay of the land for the upcoming grants round. And if anybody's got more specific questions, we can always jump into that too.
Awesome, Ben. Thanks so much for sharing that. And I just want to also take this moment here to highlight the amount of work that goes into putting all of this together. And it's just getting the money, folks, and remember, we are still in potentially a bear market, right? But in spite of that, the team at Gitcoin has managed to outdo themselves, I'm sure, in terms of just keeping everything going in place. In fact, growing it. And kudos to the team as well as to Ben for doing the amazing work that they do in service to the community. Thank you so much for all of that, Ben. Really appreciate that. Guys, this and ladies, this is the time now to raise your hands. If you have any questions, please do raise your hands, and or give me a signal. I'm happy to bring you on stage while Shamba is just going to be sharing his experience and his work, of course. But I really want him to dwell on the fact as to how Gitcoin and the community has helped him scale. I would love for him to share his thoughts. Guys, feel free to request in the meantime. Shamba, all yours, the floor.
Thank you, Pranav, and it's been great hearing the views from Ben, Natris, and everybody else. I think from Shamba's perspective, we've been trying to build Shamba as this kind of platform that can be used, by anybody who needs this kind of ecological data for their projects, and also focusing a lot on how we can advance inclusion and participation in the RFI field by especially building tools that can support groups such as farmers. And in this work, we are really grateful to Gitcoin because Gitcoin is what enabled us to set up our first geospatial oracle. And this has really grown thanks to the support we've gotten from the different Gitcoin rounds that we've participated in. We are now serving close to over 60 satellite data sets on different themes covering everything from vegetation to weather to drought indices to even wildfires. And you can be able to get information about any part of the planet. And we are serving this information now to 7 different chains. And all this is in a really large part thanks to the support which we've gotten from Gitcoin, and not just the financial support, but also all the connections that we've made in the Web3 space from participating in the Gitcoin rounds. I think, as Pranav rightly said, one of the biggest things is that you come for the support, but you live with the community. And that is one of the truest things that we found about Gitcoin. And we are really excited to be participating in this round. And we hope you guys will come and support us so that we can continue building Shamba to be the next part of the hyperstructures that everybody is working to build. So thank you, Pranav, for holding this space. And it is great having had this chance to talk to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Kennedy. Guys, feel free to raise your hands for questions. We already have some people here on stage. ZK, please go for it. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, so my question is, should we tokenize or not tokenize public goods? And if you tokenize public goods, what route of tokenization would you go? Would you go for donors and then splitting up tokens that way? Or would you go for people who like volunteers or people who impacted the public good?
Love that question. I welcome the speakers. If anybody would like to address that, yeah, go for it, Nate.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, ZK. I think that's a big open question in refi right now. So, and that's actually one of the things that I'm concerned about with refi is that a large part of the community doesn't come, unlike DeFi, doesn't come from like a financial or an economic background. So they're not exactly sure how to monetize things. And that can compromise the security and the longevity of the hyperstructure because if the incentives aren't there, eventually the hyperstructure will either it'll fail in one of two ways. It can go out with a fizzle or a bang. And if it's a bang, then there's some kind of mismatch in the protocol that's enabling it to collapse, like Terra. So in that case, there was a promise of inflationary, or not inflationary rewards. Sorry, there was a promise of rewards, and they weren't able to make good on that, and so it collapsed all of a sudden. The other way that a hyperstructure can collapse is with a fizzle, and that's, let's say, if the inflationary rewards run out and you were trying to incentivize a certain behavior, you get to the end of that, and then there's no more incentives for people to act a certain way or to participate in a hyperstructure. So this is a really important problem to address, and that's how to monetize at a higher level, whether it's through tokens or some other means. There's how do you keep the hyperstructure going. And at a high level, I think refi should be more focused on, because it's a real world. These are things in the real world that are not just isolated to the blockchain economies, unlike DeFi, which doesn't communicate with the real world so much except through price oracles. I think refi should be focused on real world incentives, matching real world incentives for people to participate in the protocol with the use of the protocol. So one example of that would be using NFTs to give people access to a community of like-minded individuals that are also interested in the same thing. So at a high level, I think the best way refi can go forward in tokenizing, for most projects, the default should be NFTs rather than trying to create a token economy with inflationary tokens, because the types of applications refi is creating don't necessarily need a token. And so that's to quickly answer that question. That's one of the biggest things I see. The biggest open questions in refi right now is how do we monetize?
Love that. Love that. Thanks so much for that, ZK and Nate. Really appreciate that. Reese, would you like to add anything?
I think Nate's question or Nate's answer was great. The only thing I'd say is, there's just looking backwards, looking at the Optimism retroactive public goods funding round is the clearest example of this. Optimism did was kickstarted in various ways through Gitcoin grants, and then they decided in their airdrop to allocate a percentage of their community tokens to Gitcoin grants funders. And so that's just like a proto example of the kind of work that people are doing around incentivization of public goods funding.
Love that. Love that. John, I'm going to come to you, but first I'm just going to bring in Ben. Ben, would you please share? You raised your hand.
Yeah, I think this is such a juicy and totally fascinating question, honestly. And, I think the points that have been raised are fabulous. What I would add is just thinking about, the broader sort of regen space, kind of beyond just like the tokenization of carbon or carbon credits. And, we are seeing a lot of experimentation with all kinds of different microeconomies being created. Definitely there's all kinds of potential problems with sort of creating inflationary structures or, sort of not self-sustaining models. But I do sort of welcome all the experimentation that's going on and sort of the different approaches that are being explored for trying to incentivize behavior change or trying to create microeconomies. Like I think, one kind of tangible example is, I'm working at Gitcoin getting paid with a governance token. And that's a microeconomy that wouldn't have existed otherwise. And has made it possible for a lot of people to do a lot of good work. Although it does, still remain an open question, sort of what the ongoing business model looks like for Gitcoin and how that kind of continues to be self-sustaining in the long term. But I think these very active and live conversations are really important and have huge implications. And I guess I'm channeling a good friend of mine here with one thought that she often kind of brings into this question or this conversation is, if we're sort of looking sort of into the future and sort of forecasting where things are going, I think we should also be thinking about what the potential downsides or problems that could emerge from the structures that we're creating, and be thinking about what kind of guardrails to put in place or what kind of sort of self-governance or self-regulation can sort of help avoid some of the potential downsides. Because of course these tools can be used by a variety of different players and actors with different motives. And I think we always sort of want the best and really just kind of keep our heads down and build. But I think if we look at a lot of the innovation that's come out of Silicon Valley in the last sort of Web 2 cycle, I guess you could say. I think when we look back at Facebook and Google, there's definitely things that could have been done differently or better that may have avoided some of the worst consequences. So I guess I invite that sort of thought process of how do we kind of collectively try to think about the most responsible ways to sort of use these tools that may proactively protect against potential downsides.
Love that, Ben. There's some juicy threads, Twitter threads coming out of this conversation, I promise you. John, I'm going to invite you, and then Maz, after John, it'll be you. John, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me up, and thanks for all the speakers today. It's been an enjoyable conversation so far. I want to take us a little bit back to hyperstructures, because I think the thing that started to come to my mind as I was listening to you all is that if we're building this composable, interoperable hyperstructures full of all sorts of incentives, how do we begin to think about bad actors and how they may build either parallel hyperstructures or just sort of tap into existing hyperstructures? But because of that composability, that interoperability, like how do we prevent a bad actor from sort of, infiltrating the hyperstructure and maybe taking advantage of those incentives or the people involved in those structures and those communities? I would be curious on your all's thoughts.
Love that question, and that really comes in, very well on what Ben was just sharing. Nate, would you like to have a stab at that?
Sure. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a concrete example there. Would you mind elaborating a little bit?
Sure. Reese?
Well, I was just going to say, I think that the question is roughly like, hey, how will these technology, blah, 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 is neutral. I actually kind of disagree with that, but these, how will these hyperstructures be used for evil in various ways, and how will we kind of navigate that ecosystem? I think what I would look at is how we do that within Web 2. Part of that is something like Mastodon and the kind of peer-to-peer, bottom-up ecosystem there, and how what they actually did is they, on their website, they have ways that they do kind of shaping with norms. There's this great person called Lawrence Lessig, who is part of the early Creative Commons, and he has this thing called Lessig's Dot, and it is looking at the 4 different ways that different structures kind of incentivize and shape us. And one of those is code, which we're all building here. But another one, which a lot of us have been talking about, Ben and Nate and I and Kenneth, is like these is the norms of the community. And so I think that what Mastodon, as an example, does with the norms, because Mastodon can be used to, funnel whatever negative thing you think exists in the world, racist, sexist, blah, 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 things, and it can also be used to kind of empower bottom-up good communities. And so on Mastodon's website, they have this, they kind of show use cases that are these kind of more beneficial bottom-up communities. And so I think that there's this is like a general answer here, but I think that like pulling ideas from the Web 2 world is actually good for how they've tried to like shape both with norms and other ways the kind of usage of these tools. And in the end, just trying to see it from the frame of, instead of like a free speech versus censorship frame, which is a very binary frame, instead to see all of these things as frictionful or frictionless ecosystems, where we're trying to add friction to things in order to generate more positive outcomes, either add or remove friction from things to generate those positive outcomes. So that's kind of my answer to it, but others feel free to chime in.
Oh, love that. I think for sure, Reese, I would love for you to just, in the thread or to the space, you can add these resources. I think there's lots of food for thought out there. And I'm definitely going to dive deeper into this question for sure. But I just want to invite Maz here, and then I'll bring on Ed. Maz, all yours.
Thanks, Pranav. Good to hear your voice again. One of the things I was wondering is we've obviously mentioned things around incentives, but talking about kind of value generated by individuals in terms of like knowledge and techniques and best practices, and I guess, like access to open source information can also really kind of contribute towards this permissionless collaboration hyperstructures. And one of the things I wanted to ask around was, you're starting to see a lot of these peer-to-peer infrastructures, especially from a kind of energy use case, doing very well in the global south, and individuals or like NGOs or even governmental bodies starting to look at it from the global north, going, okay, maybe we should be taking a chapter out of their books and implementing kind of this peer-to-peer model in a sense, and like coming up with our own methods of hyperstructures, even though they don't necessarily use the word hyperstructures. But it would be really good to kind of hear more from those types of communities that are implementing this in practice, and how can we as kind of, I guess, solvers in a sense, like, that are looking at this hyperstructure model, get more access to those communities and then onboard them into this new world. I think the access part of it is somewhat something that we constantly ponder at CrowdMuse, on like how do we bring their kind of values and knowledge on chain and kind of provide this permissionless hyperstructure within those communities that already have the appetite to do peer-to-peer models that are clearly working. So the question is incentives, skills, etc., but how do we kind of access these micro communities that we actually are, I guess, getting a lot of influence from? Any thoughts on that at all?
I will invite the speakers in case anybody wants to come in. Cool. Yeah.
Sorry, Nate, I saw you unmute. If you want to jump in, I could follow you.
No, please, go ahead.
Yeah, Ben, go ahead.
I think that's a super juicy and really fascinating question, and I'm not sure there's one perfect answer to it. Definitely we see sort of different emerging sort of new points of relationships and contact. I think things like the Gitcoin grants round are sort of an interesting space that's created where new collaborations are formed and new developments come out of it. Sort of new hyperstructures, I guess you could say, sort of evolving and emerging and growing as these new relationships are made. Not sure that's the perfect answer to your question, but I mean, I think a lot of that is, sort of the juicy stuff that's happening in the DAO space right now, like all these kind of, sub DAOs and sort of inter DAO relationships and connection. And things like token swaps that we're seeing happen, where there's kind of these shared incentive structures that kind of bring different communities into alignment in terms of everybody having a stake in the success of both projects or multiple projects. So I mean, I think this is a space that's kind of ripe for a lot more discussion, and I think, as you rightly point out, there is kind of this pre-existing peer-to-peer space that kind of has a life of its own, which I think we've yet to find the perfect model to sort of figure out exactly how these things kind of blend together. Although I'm really curious what other speakers have to say about it.
Thanks, Ben. Nate, you had something to share?
Yeah, that was great. I agree with everything Ben said. I think fundamentally this is a marketing question. This is, how do we attract people to use our protocols and our hyperstructures? And traditionally, for that, there has to be a profit incentive. And there doesn't have to be, but as we've seen with climate change activism, it's really hard to get things done on a goodwill, best effort basis. It's an idea has to be extremely compelling for a large group of people to adopt it. And I'm not sure that as nice as the after effects are, the secondary effects of moving from a centralized electrical grid system to a peer-to-peer grid system, that as compelling as those are to us, they're not that compelling for people who have a different day-to-day and different concerns. So I think, and this is what I'm primarily concerned with, is how do we attract people using things they already care about to use protocols that we care about? And as an example, I mean, there have been a few projects like this that have tried to do electrical, peer-to-peer electrical grid. You've got Energy Web Token, Power Ledger, and then a few others that are in the same kind of sphere. Helium is one that sells cell phone data, and they've had a lot of adoption. Helium has actually been really successful with a non-native, non-Web3 native crowd. And so I think copying from these kinds of protocols playbooks is the way to go about getting broader adoption. And what they've done is marketed their token and said, hey, if you all use this token and you use our protocol, the value of the token will go up, you'll be an early adopter, and we'll have this impact. So they're speaking to two groups of people. They're speaking to the ideologically motivated people like us, and they're also speaking to the users who are just normal, everyday people who might not care that the peer-to-peer grid system is going to incentivize alternative energy sources, but they're doing it anyway because there's a profit motive. So it goes back to finding incentives that people automatically care about, which is how they can make money or save money, and giving them our solution that we've built for other reasons to have a greater impact in the world.
Love that. Thanks so much for that, Nate. I mean, those real life examples really, paint such a vivid picture in the mind. Awesome. Ed, I would like you to unmute can I request you to unmute yourself and share your thoughts?
Hello all, thanks. I've been coming from the regenerative agriculture movement, been involved with it for about 50 years now, and I'm sort of been scouting, not understanding much about refi or the cryptos or the DAOs and that sort of thing. So I've been sort of scouting for the regenerative movement to sort of see. I mean, I certainly see there's a connection between regenerative finance and regenerative agriculture. But what's interesting, I find about structures is in the regenerative ag movement, the most successful organization has been no organization at all. Farmers have always been very collaborative, and we have had networks of people. They're not organized in any way, shape, or form. They're not by the government, let's say, type of an organization. Yet we know who everybody is. We connect together when we work on a project. We have a specific idea. We know the people in the network who would be interested in that. We find lots of ways of connecting. We do podcasts. We do experiments together, trials on different farms. And basically, regenerative agriculture has been developed by the farmers themselves. It certainly hasn't been academia or the corporations that have done it. And I'm talking about really the more modern day implementations of what we do, understanding all the science of how plant and bio and soil bio systems work, how we understand cover crops, all the things that we've done to advance it over the years. But as I say, since we're not organized, low in a way, it's been extremely successfully organized by not being organized. And I'm wondering how, and I think that's a lot of the concept of regenerative finance or the DAOs, but maybe we take it to an extreme level. And I don't know where regenerative finance, how do we bridge these two sort of situations, are sort of extreme DAO compared to something a little more organized that it seems to be happening in regenerative finance. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Hey y'all, I just wanted to add on to what everyone has been saying. So there's a couple of points. But first, hi.
Hi.
Well, before it was even refi. So just to comment really quickly on stuff, I think two things. One, Ben mentioned that everybody's coming from the Web3 side, and so they don't really know how to monetize. And then number two, what you guys have been talking about is how do we make it attractive, right? So I'm from TradFi. I used to trade oil and gas, but I've been volunteering with environmental projects for about 12 years now. I run Carbon-Fi, which is essentially a monetization or incentive project to get people to contribute liquidity to environmentally positive projects. I think the main part is, I think people don't, I can't remember who brought this up. There needs to be a perfect blend of people who are speculative degens and then people who are regens, because when you look at how we're doing things at the moment with these hyperstructures, we're essentially appealing only to the voluntary market. If you look at Maslow's pyramid, we only have maybe 1%, maybe 1.5 now after 12 years of people who are actually voluntarily doing something good for the sake of doing good, but everybody else needs to be incentivized, right? So when it comes down to it, you have to appeal to humanity's selfish nature. And the incentive takes place usually in the form of finances. So when we look at incentives, we have to figure out where can we produce the liquidity to create those incentives for people. And personally, I feel like most of the innovation actually comes from how people work together rather than any real technology. So not that I'm disputing how difficult it is to code or how important technology is to scale, but just that I think mindset is the hardest thing to change. So when you talk about the small farmers on the ground, and we do work with a lot of regenerative soil food web projects, the problem is that you also have to convince them and exchange basically what is social credit for loyalty, so that along the way, once you've implemented your solution, the farmers don't want to, they don't fall into the mindset of hey, I can do this better if I do this myself. But that is fighting human nature. And I think that's one thing that's very hard. If you look at what Kickstarter was 10 years ago, this is very much similar to what Web3 does. You are essentially targeting people who are already looking for a product market fit, or who has, you're looking for a market that already has a product in mind to at least sell it to. But if you want to make it beyond that segment, if you want to make it attractive to other people, you have to make it very customizable. What does someone like Mark Zuckerberg want? What does someone on the streets, with a family of 4 to feet want? So when you talk about segmentation, I think that's what's critical, is that you get enough insight into what applies for every single segment of that pyramid, and then you decide which ones you want to go for first, and then look at the rest later down the road. I think, statistically speaking, 1% of the world today, like 1% of the world, which is like the people holding the wealth of the world, are the ones producing 99% of greenhouse gas emissions. But how do you make it appealing for them? Like, at least from my side, some of the insight I've had is that if you tell them, like, in 20 to 30 years, your kids will not have um, these resources to live here, it would be sort of like a Mad Max scenario. So that's why they will work to change things, because they feel personally motivated. Of course, like, at this point, I have to bring in the fact that, like, people like Jeff Bezos also is one particular case, right? Consumerism has actually contributed to his ability to simply look at building rockets, because people like him will only look at what else can I do without losing my wealth. He builds a rocket, flies off to another planet. Why does he care about the rest of the planet? He has no reason to. You've already built his dream for him. And I think, like, if we are to appeal to every segment of society to participate in this refi ecosystem, it needs to be done at a level where you really strike what is important to them at their heart. So, regardless of tech, regardless of how it's done, I think empathetically that's how it needs to be. So, yeah, that's
love that. No, thanks for sharing. No, love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. So those are insights, of course, that apply across the board. That to every aspect of our lives, empathy is core to our functioning as a society, as one of the species that live off this earth, this planet. Thank you so much for sharing that. We are at the end of the space. We are at the top of the hour, and I would like to respect the time of my speakers out here. Each one of them is starting, are on their day right now. So really respect that. Nate, I see you have your hand raised. I'll have you let you have a quick go at it, and then you can conclude, and then I'll just go around with the speakers, just having them share their concluding remarks before I close the space. Nate.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to go back to Ed because we skipped over him, and I wanted to say, Ed, thank you so much for coming to this space. Like, it's really cool to have someone with 50 years of regenerative agriculture experience listening in on this Web3 call. That is, like, kind of mind blowing. So thank you for joining, and I wanted to address some of the things you were talking about. I think you were asking, like, where does Web3 fit into this, and how do we help integrate refi and regenerative agriculture? And I think at a high level, the biggest way that I see that being done is by providing the kind of infrastructure for people who are not yet in the regenerative agriculture community to reach each other. And I think you're probably going to start seeing a lot. Sorry, I'm getting some echo from someone. Might be easy. Okay, so I wanted to say, I think the way that you're going to start seeing a lot of people interested in regenerative agriculture that are coming from all parts of the world and all corners of the internet, and they're going to need infrastructure to tap into whatever is already going on. So there's, I think, a synchronistic. There's some symbiosis possible there, where Web3 is going to provide some infrastructure for regenerative agriculture to communicate with each other and keep track of who's doing what, and how to tap into different projects and different networks through DAOs and through marketplaces and things like that. And then all of those resources being in the same place will attract like-minded people to join the regenerative agriculture space once it's all compiled.
Awesome, Nate. Thank you so much. Any concluding remark before I pass on to the other speaker?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, thank you so much, all of you, for attending the space, and thanks, Pranav, for having me on. I think concluding remarks. I'm going to be continuing to weigh in on this. So, if anyone would like to talk about it, feel free to DM me or engage with some of my content. It's at Eat Sleep Crypto, and if you're interested if you're building a hyperstructure, I would love to help you. So if any of you are considering building protocols that are helping refi or any other part of, and really anything at all, please reach out. I would love to be a part of that.
Thank you so much for that. Ben, any closing remarks?
So much interesting stuff that came out of this conversation. Really a juicy and sort of fulsome discussion of kind of the scope and scale of the challenges that we face, and sort of the breadth of sort of innovation and opportunity that's in front of us, and it's so exciting and inspiring to be with a group of people that are kind of collectively looking at solutions and sort of new approaches. Having spent much of my life working in this space, it gives me a lot of hope being surrounded by so many intelligent people who are really excited about what's possible. I also wanted to add my 2 cents to what Ed brought up. I think there should be this idea of sort of like, what is the minimum viable structure that we really need around us to sort of create these emergent opportunities. I'm a big fan of biomimicry, and I think there's a lot we can learn from natural systems. Nobody does a better job of sort of like listening carefully to our world and sort of learning from it than farmers, who just have that hands in the earth experience. I'm a big fan of yours, Ed. It was great to connect recently, and I just want to give a shout out to Ed's YouTube series. For anybody who hasn't seen the playlists that Ed's created, go check out the links in his bio. There's some really, really useful and interesting stuff about regenerative agriculture that I think all of us could learn a ton from. I've spent many years of my life sort of being interested and still found tons of new information in there. I just want to raise my hands to you, Pranav, and to the Refi crew for making this possible, and really to everybody for being part of this ongoing conversation. Let's keep this conversation going. And unfortunately, I would love to hear what everybody else has to say, but I'm late for another call, so I'm going to have to jump off. But I'll hear everybody else's last thoughts on the recording later. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for being here, Ben. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Reese, would you like to come in?
Just thank you for hosting, Pranav. Thank you all for building great things out there, everybody. Continue to play long-term games with long-term people and build hyperstructures that win-win with other hyperstructures. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Reese. Kennedy?
Yeah, thank you, Pranav. Thanks so much for having me here. It's been great speaking to everyone. And let's support each other's projects. Let's support these hyperstructures to get built. And I believe the future is very bright. I'm looking forward. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks so much for being on this space. Please do follow Refi Podcast for more such wonderful Twitter spaces and episode drops. I love to have you here. A special shout out to Prabir for being here through the space and being the co-host. I sort of just jumped on that for you. Really appreciate you being here. Bati, I see you had raised your hand. In the interest of time, unfortunately, I'm not taking that up. I apologize for that. Hopefully, in the next space, I would love to give you the stage. In the interest of time, I am ending the space out here. Thank you again, everybody, for being here with me. Thanks so much, and have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Pranada. Sure, next time.